Welcome to yet again one of our podcasts here at The Way Forward. We are honored and thrilled today to have Jamie Jones Miller, and we are thrilled to have you. It's great to see you, Jamie. How are you today?
Oh, thanks, Chris. I'm great. This is really fun. Thank you for including me and bringing me into this team and this conversation.
Well, and that's what we do here, and we're just thrilled to have you. Let me give the audience a quick idea of who you are and why you're so special for us to have you today. Right now, Jamie is the CEO and Dean of Northeastern University in Arlington, and we're going to talk about her university and all the things that it does. More importantly, but from me, from a professional standpoint as an Army officer. She was the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Legislative Affairs, which means she was what's called a Senior Executive Service 3 individual, which is a 3-star equivalent in the government workforce that supports the Department of Defense and does some incredible things. Hopefully, we'll talk about that today. She was also the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense as an SES 2. Again, more to follow on that. Jamie is a 2018 graduate of the National Defense University Pinnacle Program, which is a great program where senior flag officers from the Department of Defense get to come together, those in uniform, those in civilian roles, those from the interagency, to learn more about the government and how we all can connect and interact with each other more efficiently for the American people. She was the Chief of Staff for Congressman Robert Whitman from Virginia, so she's been in a very important personal staff role on Capitol Hill. She's also the legislative director for Congressman Rodney Forbes, also from Virginia. She received her bachelor's degree from James Madison University in Washington, D.C., or excuse me, in Virginia.
Yes, go
And
Dukes.
to make sure I say that one right. And Jamie is also the chair of the Leadership Council of Women National Security, which we hopefully will talk about today. And she's a member of the National Advisory Council, Blue Star Families, dedicated to serving military families as well. She is the 15th national president of a very interesting sorority called Alpha Sigma Tau, which we'll also hopefully talk about here in a bit. And with all of that, I will say, Jamie, again, welcome. And is there anything I missed in your illustrious bio?
Well, I guess for these purposes, I'm an Air Force brat, and I feel like that's really a huge part of my identity. Both my parents being public servants, my father retiring from the Air Force, he was a defense attaché, and so we were served abroad for many years. And my mom retired from the Department of Defense as a civilian, and so I think that's really kind of what set me on my path of public service, and I'm grateful to them for the opportunities that I've had along the way.
Yeah, I think that I too am an Air Force brat. The more conventional side of the Air Force piece of it, though, we were not attachés. When my dad deployed, we didn't go with him. But it's interesting. There could be a whole podcast on military kids. We just had General Funk and General Garrett on here, and they're both military kids. And so that military brat, the term of endearment, continues wherever we go in our life. And so you have had such a dynamically different and eclectic career. Just give us an idea of what this journey's been like so far.
Yeah, I think there is a thread throughout, and want to pull on that a little bit. But talking about my parents, I mean, it starts there. National security is the family business, and so I knew that that was a path that I wanted to take. Ultimately led me to Capitol Hill, where I had the privilege of working for two senior members of the House Armed Services Committee, both from my home state of Virginia, and really the opportunity to kind of see how Virginia as the Commonwealth contributes to the national security enterprise, and then really understand how the United States plays, in this global environment. And then that led me to an opportunity at the Pentagon to work in the Office of Legislative Affairs, which gave me a completely different perspective, right, about the national security enterprise, how DoD plays in the interagency, how we play with allies and partners. And I really appreciated seeing that other side of the coin. And then now in this role at Northeastern University, I have an opportunity to help build the talent pipeline that is going to solve for these really wicked global security challenges. And that's kind of an exciting thing, a turn for me, something scary. I jumped from everything I'd ever known in my career, from being a public servant right into academia, but it's because I feel so strongly about investing in talent and trying to kind of build up that team that's going to work on these very complex, wicked challenges.
Yeah, yeah. And I imagine on that journey you've seen you've probably seen some sausage making, but you've also seen those billion-dollar decisions and how those are made. And you know, some of the offices you've worked in, they probably don't even have a discussion under $1 billion. I mean, so that's
I one of my favorite moments as an Air Force brat was when I was asked to serve on the Space Governance Council at the Department of Defense, which determined the form that the United States Space Force would ultimately take. And so sitting in that room, right, and having a vote, literally with respect to how Space Force was going to evolve, was pretty interesting, right, for the daughter of an Air Force pilot. But seeing how something like that came together with a president who was really driving the public debate, members of Congress on both sides who wanted some form of a Space Corps, Space Force, right? And then all of the opposing pressure points involved in finally getting to legislative language in a bill. And that was a pretty interesting moment for me from a career standpoint, because you're sitting at a table and you're talking about enterprise level decisions, and a lot of stakeholders were involved. So I learned a lot from that particular experience.
and I'm sure you learned an incredible amount about processes and procedures, or you know, from my experience, the lack thereof. And
Yeah,
and as I learned, and as you, when you were on the Hill, I'm sure you taught people like me all the time who come from a very symmetrical, hierarchical organization called the Army or the Department of Defense. And also, you walk in the world, and the only thing that keeps everything moving are relationships.
that's right.
So tell
Absolutely.
us about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the the relationships are really what mattered in my role as chief of staff or in the Office of Legislative Affairs. And this is what I share with senior leaders at the department, or with colleagues or former colleagues on the Hill or folks in industry. When we're talking about engaging Congress or engaging the Department of Defense, are we viewing it through a transactional lens, or are we viewing it through a long-term relationship focused lens?
Right.
And I think sometimes when we approach engaging the Hill, for example, it's a transaction. It's an office call or a meeting where you check the box. But the reality is that the relationships and the long-standing ties are what can move the needle, and what, when you're jammed on process, what can be an unlocking condition, right, to get some forward movement. So it's really the people. And that, for me, I think is the best part of my time on the Hill. With Congressman Forbes and Congressman Whitman, our alumni groups, so former staffers in both of those offices, I mean, we are tight,
Yeah.
very, very tight. And so they're the people that I call on and reach back to today, even though we've all scattered to the winds back to, maybe they're, active duty and they've taken on multiple assignments since they were with us, or they were staffers in the office and now they live somewhere else, or they're in a lobbying firm. Those are the people that I call on to help get stuff moving.
Well, and that's I'm gonna throw this in and compliment you that that is truly one of your superpower of being able to connect people. And my experience seeing that, you know, it's similar to that within DoD. You're doing that within a very different environment, but there are still very lockstep things that have to happen. There are systems and there are procedures and there are policies, you know, and so if you follow those, you can get down that path. But coming into the Hill and seeing again, every from day one, Chris, it's about building, establishing, and maintaining relationships, which is kind of that glue or the connective tissue to make things happen. So people like you jump from that kind of a job into the DoD and continue to manifest that ability to connect people. How did that help
Yes.
when you finally went to the big five-cornered building?
Yeah. I mean, here's a perfect example. I was on a holiday on vacation. I was out of town and I got a phone call from SecDef cables, which is kind of the routing system for the secretary's office. And I won't say who was calling, but on the other end of the line, the question was asked about why there was a member of Congress in a particular country, and was
Yeah.
I aware of that? And it's hard to answer that question. Like, you say, no, I'm not aware that that member is in country. And then, you don't look great. And then if you say, yeah, I am aware, and it's like, well, why are they there? So in this case, I was not aware that that member happened to be in this particular country. And I was quickly informed about a timeline that that member needed to exit said country. And so I, thank goodness, knew that member's chief of staff and had his personal cell phone number in my personal cell, and was able to get that person on the phone on a holiday and say, I hope you know where your boss is and how to get a hold of them, because they need to be out, by the time we sit down for turkey dinner, right? And thank goodness that I had that connection, because otherwise, I don't know what would have happened. And that's just one in a series of events like that transpired over my time in legislative affairs.
Eh, yeah, I'm sure you have. I have to tell you one because you know this guy, and I'm not going to say his name out loud. I was literally minding my own business in the bowels of the Pentagon, and I got a message from our switch. And so, of course, if you use your private cell phone, you have to leave the Pentagon. And so I'm out in the parking lot, and I'm talking to an individual who's in the headquarters in a foreign country during a big fight. And he's like, I know where the bad guys are. And I'm like, okay, you're there. Why don't you tell them? He's like, they won't let me in. And I said, okay, hang on. And so I called the brigadier general who was inside the building and said, this guy knows where that. She goes, well, where is he? I said, open the door. But he knew if he called that we could connect those things very quickly when
Yeah.
systems break down and the processes aren't as well established as they should be. And of course, all of the minutiae you got to get through to get there, relationships and connections can help. They really can. And so
Yeah,
very
I would
cool.
agree. And I think it's that trust bank concept. Are you making deposits into the trust bank for when you need to make a withdrawal? But also, as I'm advising my principal, the chief of staff, as the chief of staff, for example, it's really thinking about the resources that they have that are finite. It's their
Right.
time and their personal capital. So are we leveraging the principal's time and capital to achieve the outcomes that we want, consistent with their values, right, and their priorities? And so I think about that now wearing a CEO hat or a dean hat. It's like, am I working on the things that only I can work on? And then am I empowering it and removing obstacles and barriers for others, right, to do the work in their space that they're uniquely qualified and able to do? And that's really cool, because I think I'm better at that because I have been in that principal staff role before.
Well, let me pull that thread then. So you're empowering your subordinates because you see the power of that. How do you're new, you're putting a team together, you come in there, they don't know you from Adam, you don't have that capital with the new team. How do you convince them that you're going to underwrite the risk with them getting that kind of power? What
Yeah, I love that framing. I think it's really important to communicate that there is a vision, right? What is the vision? Where are we going? If there are left and right limits or boundaries that we have to stay in, what are they, right? And then communicate a very strong um, picture of what the desired end state is. What is the outcome? Where are we trying to go? But also at the same time communicating that this is a culture of change, and probably the top skill set that's needed is resilience.
Yeah.
And so from a startup environment, so I have launched a graduate campus of Northeastern University in Arlington, Virginia, in the National Capital Region. Um, we've built out a physical campus, right? We have students, we have graduate programs, we have a research institute. I mean, all of these things are falling in, but it's still a startup. And so communicating that how we're doing it today may not be how we're doing it in 100 days, may not be how we're doing it, in 6 months from now. But if we're learning and adjusting and iterating along the way while still keeping that end state in mind, that's a win. And then I think also for me, I've said I don't know more in this role than I ever have before. And that's very humbling, but I think having that level of vulnerability and saying, I'm new to this too, like, let's figure it out together, uh, can be motivating. And the key is finding the people that want to work in that environment. So as I've been interviewing people, I've been very transparent to say, this is a startup. There is no playbook, there's no manual, there is no checklist, right? We have other campuses that have launched, and we will learn from them and use our communities of practice and leverage them in our work. But also, we're going to make mistakes, and we're going to fail, and I'm going to make mistakes, and I'm going to fail along the way.
Okay, so now I got to ask you. So here you are, you're interviewing me.
Yeah.
And what is the one thing I can say that puts me in your good column? And what's the one thing I can say that puts me in the I'm not hiring this guy column? With
Yeah.
what you just said, what is the person who's out here watching this saying, okay, if this is what an interviewer says to me, what's the right answer?
Yeah. I mean, I hear oh, I'm really excited to join a startup. I mean, this idea of building culture along the way is really interesting to me. And I have this very entrepreneurial and innovative spirit. And then they say, okay, tell me what the next 6 months are going to look like. Right. So, I don't want to bait and switch anyone. And I think being very upfront about the collaborative, open nature of the way we work at our global university campuses, it's by design. We like this idea of collision across colleges and across functional areas. And to me, it's very similar to my experience in the congressional office, because we had 10, 11 people jammed into 1,200 square feet, and there were no silos, right?
Yeah.
So I've at least had the benefit of that. But when people talk about, what's your comfort level on working in a highly matrixed organization with cross-functional teams, I try to peel that back a little bit about, like, what does that really, really mean?
Yeah. Yeah. It does. It takes a certain mindset. And I'm not trying to give somebody the answers to the test. It's
Yeah.
just you in the position as a CEO, in all the leadership roles you have. I think people who are aspiring to be in your position, you start to pick up on those nuances of, like I said, many times I would say, I don't know, what do you think?
Mm-hmm.
And what I loved in an environment that you're talking about, if I said, I said, I don't know. I'm not sure. I mean, I know we're trying to do this. I know this is the ultimate goal, as you stated, but what do you think? Because, when I was younger, I always hated the boss who would say, we got a problem and here's what we're going to do. And then he'd go, Chris, what do you think? And I was like, what you said,
Yeah.
that didn't help much, boss. But so, and you have to, as a boss, you have to figure out how to not do that, because you don't realize how often you're doing that. So I would always start off with, we got a problem or an opportunity. What do you guys think we should do about it? And step back and watch who actually engages. And those were the people that I knew I could give more rope to. They would be innovative. They would take prudent risk to get things done, and then just let me know later. But
Yes.
for others, I realized I have to be very prescriptive with, otherwise they're going to stand there and wait for me to tell them
To give
what
an
to do.
answer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's a really interesting dynamic that I'm starting to kind of play in the space now. Again, going back to this being a startup, I was a founder of the campus, right?
Yeah.
And so I sort of still have that founder mentality. And so as we hire more and more layers of people who are further away from me on the org chart, maintaining the discipline and the fidelity around why Northeastern and Arlington, and what the outcomes are, is hard,
Yeah.
right? Because this is not a command and control environment where I'm saying this is the thing and this is how it shall be, right? So this is actually something I've never worked with an executive coach before, but it's something that I requested as part of my professional development, and have been working with an executive coach on changing my leadership mindset from being in this startup founder phase to
Yes.
how do I support the campus as a leader and as an executive as it matures.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of our clients are, is making that transition. Because all the things that you articulated that you loved at the beginning was the startup and the founder and the innovation and the ability for people to think and move. As your scope and complexity grows, you have to start putting some left and right limits. You have
That's
to
right.
making some things that at first were not routine, but now they're just routine things. And a lot of you people know, because we've always done it that way. Now you got to codify some of that stuff to create some structure so more and more people can pile on and be as efficient. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
an interesting dynamic.
It's an interesting dynamic, and I think that's where do we find those best practices, the economies of scale, right? All the business terms, sure. And then give ourselves permission to say, actually, we don't need to do that thing anymore. Um, this is no longer relevant, or we need to add more nuance or more layer to this. And so I've really tried to think about this as a phased approach, kind of two ways. Give ourselves permission to think about this as a phased approach. We don't have to do all the things right now, right?
Right.
What does it look like to do it in phases and layers? Number one. And number two, I am okay with a 70% solution on something right now. I don't need 100%. It's good. It's impossible. Let's try 70% and see where that gets us, and then refine and iterate. And some people are not comfortable with that. And frankly, the old me, like the A student who sits on the front row who wants perfection, I had a hard time with that because I want 100%.
Yeah. Well, that's, by just saying 70%, you're starting to set the conditions for the underwriting risk, because
That's
what you're
right.
saying is, I'll take 30% risk to get 70% now. But again, that 70%, that 30% can't be a gamble. It has to be, some sort of risk that's identified and we mitigate it, but we accept it and you underwrite it. If it fails, if the 70% fails, the boss has underwritten that. And to me, that builds trust and motivation in me to work for you, because I want to get better as a result of you taking the hit and say, well, that seemed like a good idea. Let's go back, let's assess it, let's make sure we better understand it, then let's go forward with it and go from
Yeah.
there.
And I think it's not, and this is something that my boss has kind of coached me on, is just kind of the operating environment I'm in today, vice sitting in the five-sided building, right? And I'm not performing heart surgery, right? I'm not, in that operating room. Lives are not at stake, right? However, the stakes are high for what we do and where we are, and I want to make sure I'm respectful of that. But it is that risk calculation. I have learned what really matters and what needs to be protected, and what does have to be the 100%, and then where we have some maneuvering room. And that again is a new and foreign concept to me after working in literal no fail environments, right?
Yeah.
Failure is not an option. There is no 70% option, right? So I've had to adjust my way of thinking on that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting because you were talking about layers and you were talking about maybe we don't have to do something anymore. When I coach, when I look for what I call historical scabs. You know,
Yes.
the business got a cut on it for something 5 years ago. And so it put a system or a policy in place, and that scab just grows and grows and grows. And it becomes a administrative nightmare until you finally go, hey, let's scrape the scab off and see, do we still need to do that? And so, one of the pinnacle courses I went to, there's a really smart scientist. He said, all businesses need to do what we do in the scientific world, which is ask the big three questions. And one of them is, what do we need to stop doing?
Yeah.
And every CEO should just at some periodic point in time just stop and go, okay, everything we're doing, what do we need to stop doing? And that's to quit doing things that are no longer necessary, to buy back people time and money, and apply to the second question is, what is it we're supposed to be doing? And are we doing that as well as we can? And if
Mm-hmm.
we're not, it's probably because we're wasting time on the first one. So let's take that people time money, apply it to what we're supposed to be doing. And only after we do that can we go to the third question is what innovative thing do we need to do next?
Mm-hmm.
So you're constantly rolling those resources across the three questions to stay ahead, instead of sitting around going, oh my gosh, the example I used to give is, I was in a command where every Thursday my staff was wiped out because they had to produce a report for our higher headquarters due 8 o'clock on Friday morning. And so I didn't have a staff all day long on Thursday, and it was crisis. It was like we never did it before. We did it over again every Thursday. And so finally I just went down to the chief, put everybody in the room, and I said, tell me what this report is and why are we doing it? Nobody could answer the question other than I get these questions every week and I have to answer them and I have to go dig through everything. And I said, you know what, who wants this report? Well, higher headquarters. And I'm like, who? Give me a name. And nobody could really give me a focal point. So I said, all right, look, here's what we're going to do. We're not going to do the report this week. And
Let's see if anyone notices.
I want to see who gets mad or if
Yeah.
anybody even calls. I said, if anybody
Yeah.
calls and says, where's my report? I want you to tap them straight into me so I can meet them and ask
Yes.
them if they first, do you outrank me? Do you have the authority to tell me, my staff, what to do? And second is what is the purpose of this report? And what is it we're not doing that this report is not systematic and just happens every day? And it turned out that it was just the staff above them felt they had the power to tell my staff what to do. And so when I went to my boss and said, I'm not going to do this report anymore because all the information your staff needs is on their computers. They just have to download it themselves instead of making my staff do it. He goes, I don't even know what this report is. I don't care if you do it or not. But that command had done that report
Yeah.
for years.
The machine was at work, right?
Yeah.
And I will credit Dr. Peter Fever from Duke University, who does a lot of work on civ-mil relations, who says, keep in mind that your dysfunction may be someone else's function,
Yeah.
right? That there is a system that may be designed because it is convenient, helpful, useful for one entity,
Right.
but may be dysfunctional for you. And are you creating systems and processes that are functional for you, but dysfunctional for everyone else?
Oh,
And
yeah.
I appreciate that lens because there's this tension in the interagency and across the national security enterprise with process. I mean, literally, down to the protocol office that decides where you get to sit based on your rank or relative importance, to the other principals at the table, much less this very prescriptive process about how a decision and action makes its way through to the president in essence, right? And so I'd like to think about that a lot. Like, in what areas is my function causing dysfunction across the organization?
Yeah. And that, when again, with startups, as they continue to expand and, contract in certain areas, but as they begin to grow, it's fun to look at the system, to try to
Yes.
draw. And as in the Army, we understand, visualize, and describe. And so I will take a business and say, tell me what you do and show me how you do it. And when you're done, you start drawing domains.
Yes.
So this is this your domain? I mean, your domain is over here, it's over here, it's over here, it's all disconnected. And when it goes from your domain to their domain, who owns it when it crosses this line, and what's the format it comes in? And suddenly they realize, wow, we've got a lot of people doing a lot of stuff that they don't need to do because we don't know, like what you're talking about is your domain, is it affecting somebody else's domain?
Mm-hmm.
You don't even know what their domain is, and you don't understand the scope of your domain. So yeah,
That's fascinating. And I think that relates to, you mentioned in the intro, kind of talking about the different dynamics of the SES Corps and how that works at the Department of Defense, for example. So as the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Legislative Affairs, I was a non-career senior executive service appointee. So not a career civilian. There are members of SES, most of the SES Corps are career civilians, and they are really that institutional knowledge that understands kind of the changing dynamics as your military leadership comes in and out on an 18, 24, 36-month basis, or a political leadership, a non-career SES appointee or a Senate confirmed individual, they're in and out in 18, 24, 36 months. And so that cadre of SES are really that institutional leadership across time, and in many cases across functional area at the department. And they play a really critical role in navigating, right, where some of these tension and friction points show up. And of course, the, managing and the process and the machine, um, for how decisions are made. And they can be they are a fantastic resource to their leadership, whether it's a political appointee or someone in military leadership, because they have seen this process function before and are those key advisors, right, of maybe how to navigate the system effectively.
Yeah, and I think people have such a they just don't appreciate what these what I have found to be highly motivated and dedicated and passionate people who understand that if they're not in those positions, that the transient structure of our government, where congressman 2 years, senator 6, staffers flowing with the members
Mhm.
in and out. Even the House and the Senate have professional staffers, people that are on the committees who can maintain that continuity, that aren't affected by who is elected and who is not, to a degree, because the
Mhm.
majority might change the design. But you might meet staffers who've been in those positions for many, many years, who understand the history of why and what's been tried
Yes.
before, and how hard it is to do some things and not others. But in the government, across all the agencies, these government civilians are critical. They're that connective tissue. They're the glue that keep it all together while all the others rotate. I think it's interesting because unless you've been in the environment, you don't understand that someone like you comes and goes based upon administration. But the most senior people on our design in the government is the military is subservient to the civilian leadership.
Mhm.
So when I tell people, who's in charge of the army, they'll always say General so and so, and I'm like, no, there's nobody in uniform who's in charge of the army. It's a
Yeah.
civilian political appointee selected by the president of the United States and confirmed by the Senate. And they look at you and they're like, what? And you go, yeah, it's the
Yeah.
secretary of the army. They're not a secretary, they are the leader of the army. So yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. Um, I want to continue to pull this connected tissue thing and connecting people. Tell people about your role as the 15th national president of Alpha Sigma Tau. I'm
Yeah.
really curious. I love this thing.
Yes. So Alpha Sigma Tau is one of 26 international sororities at college campuses in the United States and Canada. Many of them are at least 100 years old, if not more. Um, we also work very closely with the Divine Nine, the National Panhellenic Conference fraternities and sororities, who or have been formed at historically Black colleges and universities. And then there are fraternal organizations, fraternities that also exist kind of in this orbit. And then other organizations that are Asian American Pacific Islander organizations or Hispanic heritage organizations. And so the fraternity and sorority community is quite large with a very large reach. So my organization, founded 125 years ago in 1899, at a time when fewer than 3% of the female population went to college and when women didn't have the right to vote. And they came together behind closed doors to figure out how to give each other what we would call today a competitive advantage
Mhm.
in their academic career or whatever they wanted to do in life. I mean, again, 1899, right? These were very visionary women in my organization and in others. And so today we have chapters all across the United States, and I have the privilege of serving as the chair of the board and the president. We're a multi-million-dollar national nonprofit organization with philanthropic partners like Girls Who Code and Dress for Success. And really, our mission is to empower women and give them the skills that they need to successfully navigate life. And so, as you think about kind of connections and where my career has led now into academia, I really feel strongly that we've got to equip young people in both the professional and academic settings, but also in a social setting
Yeah.
with the emotional intelligence, the skills, the ability to form relationships, the ability to have crucial conversations and navigate conflict, and then support them through their career with a very strong network. And so that's why, I spend my time serving on the board of the sorority.
And and most people out there that have not been involved in this world, I think most of them think that that's just contained to when you're in college. We've all seen
Hmm.
movies that give us that
Yeah,
impression. But this is just like the Divine Nine, the philanthropic fraternities and sororities. You can join these well after you've gone, and you don't even have to be a college graduate. I don't believe
that's
in
right.
most
That's
cases.
right. Yeah.
And so these are organizations that you can join that connect you to people with not like mindsets, really more diverse than anything else from what I've seen. I spent a lot of time working with the Divine Nine when I was at Cadet Command doing
Hmm.
programs because you always want to try to connect with influencers, people who have positive intentions in mind to help young men and women like your sorority does. And I went to Tampa, went to the National Divine Nine meeting, and I said, look, here is an opportunity that the African American community is not leveraging, and I think it's because we've failed to show you the opportunity. And I met with the Divine Nine, and I started sponsoring through the Army sponsored their conclaves, so we could go to leadership conclaves and talk to those young men. In the case that I went, about what opportunities there were. And most didn't understand you could get a 2-year scholarship. They always thought you had to apply when you're in high school to get a 4-year ROTC scholarship. I said, no, we can do it in 1 or 2. And guess what? You're halfway through your college career. You've been identified by your fraternity or sorority as a leader. We're looking for you. And here's a 2-year scholarship. Come join the team. And that really did a lot to help us to make sure we maintained, that the Army looked like our civilian society by having the African American officers come up and do the thing that they do as soon as they get in the Army and do very well. So
Hmm.
yeah, the organizations like yours allow employers and then allow other individuals to make those connections because again, it's all about relationships.
It is. And that network, and this is what I'm saying to our graduating seniors right now, put your Alpha Sigma Tau network to work for you. Make AST work for you now. And think about back to 1899, the founders that were meeting behind closed door in secret because women were not allowed to gather outside the
Yeah.
classroom at that time. This could be your competitive edge. This could be your competitive advantage. You have a ready-made network. You've grown leadership skills, right? And those intangibles that employers are looking for.
Yeah.
So leverage that. And then I think the other angle, um, we've seen the United States, the Surgeon General of the United States has put out an alert, a warning, a report that there is a loneliness epidemic in this country.
Yep.
And how do we leverage fraternal organizations, other organizations, right, to build those connections to get after that sense of loneliness and that lack of a feeling of belonging, and particularly as we're coming out of COVID. So that's something that I'm thinking about long term. And I think about it at the most basic level with our college students and what they're facing, and then even at the executive level.
Yep.
I certainly face some element of executive loneliness. And how do I navigate that in this role? Where do I find my people, right, that I can talk to and um, I don't know, share ideas with and learn from. And I don't know if it gets harder, right? The more higher up the org chart you go, but it's certainly something that I'm wrestling with.
Oh yeah, yeah, and and you've said a couple of key pieces of that today. You've told us that your leadership approach is more vulnerable and than probably most, which is to me very powerful to be vulnerable enough. And because you talked about emotional intelligence, that means you have strong self-awareness and that you have great empathy for others and you understand others well enough to be comfortable being vulnerable. They're saying, I don't know, what do you guys think in empowering your team? But yes, as you do get more senior, you've been in senior positions, but you've been around really senior people. You've been at the footstool of power. You've seen the secretary, But even in that position, he's got enough peers, that he can reach out to other secretaries. But in the civilian world, who do you reach out to? And the third thing you said was you have a coach,
Yes,
which is great that you've made that decision to do that. But I am positive you have mentors.
I do. Many
Tell
mentors.
Talk about, how did you get them?
Yes.
How do you keep them? And how do you become one?
Yeah, I mean, I can't be more of an advocate for building your personal board of directors, right? And these are people that they may be a mentor. They might, that is kind of that cheerleader and someone to help, kind of I can go to, and maybe a coach. It's somebody I'm going to for a very specific purpose. Or it may be a champion, someone who's willing to use their personal capital to help me advance to whatever the next thing is or open a door for me. So I think your board of directors has to be a collection of the mentors, the coaches, and the champions. Absolutely. And there are people, that maybe I'll talk to once a quarter. But what I mean, I'm looking at my notebook right now, and I have a list of names that I keep on my desk of people that I would like to check in on. I haven't heard from in a while, or maybe I saw them post something on LinkedIn that's really interesting, or somebody who has a job that I find particularly interesting. And I'll send a note and I'll reach out and say, hey, I'm thinking about you, or I saw this article or whatever. And I feel like that's really important. That helps cut down on the loneliness. But I do have, I mean, right now I've got a group of, I would say 5 or 6 people who I've actively been talking about with respect to this role that I'm in now and how to maximize and leverage it. How do I get over this kind of identity crisis of being a public servant my whole life? Like, who am I if I'm not a senior congressional staffer or a senior DoD official, right? And then what's next? Like, what's over the horizon? I have a tremendous opportunity here at Northeastern, and I am so invested in the work that we're doing. How can I reach outside of my bubble, right? And find opportunities that could benefit the Arlington campus of Northeastern or our global university system. And so that's how I'm using my board of directors right now, but it changes during different phases. And then I try and pay it forward. So, I mean, perfect example, my husband, Tim, he's the vice president for student affairs at our alma mater, James Madison University. And whenever he meets with or talks to a student who's interested in public service or national security or international affairs, he'll refer that student to me. We'll do an informational interview.
Yep.
I'll set a calendar invite to do a check-in with them. And this has played out now with several students. And one student has now just landed a fellowship with the Leadership Council for Women in National Security, which I chair. And she just posted about it on LinkedIn. And that is so rewarding to me.
Yeah, yeah, that's incredible. And when I talk to CEOs, I always talk about, be careful you don't have, and I know you don't because you didn't grow up in a symmetrical world, but people will tend to have symmetrical mentors,
Yes.
doing the exact same thing they're doing. It is so powerful to have a diverse, board of directors, as you put it, to, somebody who, everything from a chaplain over here to a business person over here to, somebody who you may not exactly agree with the way they see it,
Yes.
but you have to hear that side of the story as well. You can't just have everybody who's going to tell you you look great, you're tall, you're good looking, you're awesome.
Yeah.
You
I don't
need
need any more cheerleaders, right?
yeah,
I
yeah,
need people who are going to say, you know what? Let me challenge you on that. Or have you considered doing this thing? Or I have this opportunity in mind, but why don't we think about it? And I think that's I mean, that's kind of the ultimate from the networking perspective.
yeah.
What I would say to people is the value of my network is I want to be considered for opportunities I didn't know existed and
Mhm.
I want my name to come up in rooms that I'm not in,
All right, that's good.
right?
I like that.
And I think that's the key, right? Your network, it can be boundary spanning and multi-channel and all the things, but you can't be present for your 3,000, connections on LinkedIn. And that's really the trick for me. It's how do I be present in the communities that I'm in? And it's a challenge. I mentioned kind of that identity crisis of leaving public service and not being in national security day to day. And I think I've kind of overcorrected. I think I've said yes to too many things
Yes.
for fear of missing out. right? Or for fear of being out of the game. And so that's something I'm trying to kind of recalibrate here at where I am at this stage of my career.
Well, and and you grew up, we both grew up in similar environments where it was discouraged to toot your own horn. It was
Mhm.
discouraged to, to come across as selfish and narcissistic and that, oh, I'm better than everybody. And I need to toot my horn on LinkedIn and stuff like that. So when you come into the civilian sector as you have and I have, it's very uncomfortable to come out and say, hey, I think, or we should do this and try to get into those circles. And so I think we slowly learn how to do that within our comfort zone, but it takes a long time. It's taken me almost 6 years to be able to post something without fear of coming across as some arrogant old guy sitting out in the middle of nowhere, Iowa,
Yeah.
saying something about what's going on in the federal government today. Because who am I? But what you find is that you have a different perspective, and you get to hear things, and you get to synthesize things differently from a more asymmetric standpoint. So what I like is the relationships from Capitol Hill, like you're talking about. I have staffers, former staffers, but I have a lot of staffers who still call and say, hey, the Army's about to do this.
Mhm.
I go, well, that doesn't sound right. And they go, yeah, can you before we send over the congressional inquiry, can you make a call?
Mhm.
Sure. And I'll call and say, hey guys, heads up, and here's how you might want to consider, approaching this problem. And that makes me feel good because I've helped both of the things that I respect. And so it's good for the nation. So anyway, what else? What other kinds of things can we tease out of you before the end of the day? We're kind of coming up on time here.
Um, I mean, I think this question of time and personal capital is really important, and you've just alluded to this a little bit, but you being willing to use your personal capital for someone else, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not a huge lift for you to pick up the phone and call a person. Um, and so that's something I'm really kind of exploring as I'm thinking about how and where I use my time, but my energy. And it's that kind of energy conservation. I personally want to think about a little bit further as a leader. Where am I deploying my energy to have the greatest effect? And
Hmm.
when am I reserving my energy, right, in low threat, low risk areas that I don't need to use it? And I think that's something I learned in government, but maybe the wrong way, because everything was in the important and urgent quadrant of the Eisenhower matrix, right?
Right.
And so I would just say, kind of as a, an end thought in terms of my leadership development is really thinking about where am I spending energy, where am I conserving energy, and how and where should I be having impact, and how can I collaborate with other people to multiply the effect or the impact. It's a really interesting kind of question and an opportunity for me here at the Arlington campus to collaborate and multiply effect across our global network with other partners at other campuses at the university. And so it's something I'm excited to explore as in this next phase of leadership at the institution.
I love it. I love it. I love the idea of when do you spend your energy? Because I struggle with that every day, as you well
Yeah,
know, with some friends that we have. Is like, do I really want to make that call? And will it have something that's impactful for the good of what we all consider the most important things?
yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna ask you one more question because you've been
Okay.
very. Give me a Jamieism. What is something if I grabbed one of your staff personnel and pulled them into, a conference room and said, give me a thing that describes your boss best. Give me a phrase or a saying. What is she constantly repeating and beating into your head?
This is a really interesting question because I was taught to not be predictable by my parents who are, in the intelligence field, Chris. Um, I don't know that it's an ism necessarily, but I really try hard. I This is something I really have worked on. Um, And I'll make a note sometimes on my notebook, and I can't remember where I learned this from or who taught me this, but I write a note on the top of my notebook going into meetings that says wait, WAIT, why am I talking?
Yeah. Okay.
Um, and it's not something that I say out loud necessarily, but I think it's probably more like a body language thing that maybe people would say. Like I'm trying to watch, like, when am I leaning in? When am I leaning back? Right? Really trying to be present. And yeah, I struggle with that. I really do. I really struggle with that.
Well, nobody say that's profound. I guess what I would say is, what do you write at the top of your notebook before you walk in the meeting?
Yes.
What do you, and I bet the descriptor is she listens and she cares because you do wait and you let those people tell you what they think you should do first before you tell them what you think they should do.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And the other thing I'm trying to cut down are all of the Pentagonisms, right? So I'm super mindful of that. And that's probably why my reaction to this question was a little hard. I've tried to cut the Hill staffer language, the Pentagonisms out of my language here.
Yeah.
And that's been challenging. I mean, my favorite thing, when people would say something's OBE, like it's overcome by events,
Yeah.
that's my favorite. I mean, I feel like I live in a world that's, from minute to minute, something is OBE. So I've been very mindful, right, that I'm using the right terminology
Yeah.
and language for my operating environment.
I actually got a text from a CEO that says, I don't know what you mean by leveling the bubbles.
Yes.
And I don't understand long pole in the tent. And so
Yeah.
I had to write, I got a little sticky right there. I'm looking at it as you're saying. They said, don't use those terms.
Yeah. But
All
that's
right.
important. And that goes back to the relationships and the communication, right? Are we speaking the same language or are we talking past each other? And in this new operating environment that I'm in, I'm overly sensitive to that. And it's been a good learning opportunity for me.
Excellent. Thank you so much. This has been wonderful. We'll do it again soon. Okay.
Yeah, hopefully I'll get to see you in person. Thank you, Chris. Take care.
Thanks.